Hey everyone, Dave or EphiTV here. I know the channel's been a little quiet lately. That's because I've been doing quite a lot the past month. I have a big Oblivion video that I teased a little bit earlier, but that still needs a little more polish to finish off. In the meantime, I've been spending pretty much all my time on a game jam. I don't know if you've seen on the channel, probably about a year or two ago, I did a video covering the HauntedPS1 and the PS1 revival, where a bunch of indie developers got together and have been remaking or making new old PS1 style horror games. Outside of YouTube, I spend a lot of my time developing games, so I figured it'd be fun to join a short game jam, spend a month on a game, make a PS1 style horror game, but kind of do it in my own way, not necessarily conforming to the limitations of the PS1, just kind of that retro, low poly aesthetic. So anyways, that jam wrapped up pretty recently. There's about 100 entries, including mine. They're all free to play. You can go check them out right now on the jam page. I'm going to leave a link to that in the comments. My game for the jam is called Siren's Wharf. It's a underwater first-person shooter / stealth game, and then there's a lot of other good entries. So I played a good handful of them. I'm going to be giving some opinions on each. A lot of these games come from pretty much the whole range of developers, first-time developers, intermediate developers who have worked on these games for a long time. So we're not just going to be sitting here trashing games or anything. We're going to talk about things that are kind of cool, maybe things I could improve on, and just some very light opinions on each, so hopefully you guys can find some stuff you like, maybe try them out yourself. So without further ado, I'm just gonna jump into the games, rapid fire, try and get through as many of these as possible, and then I'll leave links to everything down below. First game I played was The Bends. This one is where you play as an old-timey diver walking on the seafloor. There's a nice old-timey voiceover to go with it. It's got that kind of transatlantic accent, you know, that you might hear in BioShock or something. In the beginning of the game, it only showed controller controls. I didn't have my controller set up at the time, so it was kind of awkward trying to figure it out on a keyboard. I was mostly just walking down this slope in the ocean, I guess, and things build up over time. They get spookier as you go along. I got pretty far into it, I think, maybe like 6 minutes or so, and then I fell in a pit and died. Had to restart from the beginning, which means another 6 minutes or so of walking. Something came up IRL, so I pressed escape to pause the game real quickly, and that closed it again. I felt I was getting kind of close to the end of the game, but after 2 complete restarts in a row and so many other games on my list, I had to put it down for now. The next game I played was called Watershed. This game actually had quite a lot of 2D going on, even though it was a 3D game. Like half the stuff in the game were just 2D textures that face the camera all the time, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think they pulled off this aesthetic pretty well. There were some very, very heavy screen effects, you know, VHS, noise, all that stuff. So if you're sensitive to those screen effects, I wouldn't play this one. But on the other hand, if you like those old retro effects, I think this is right up your alley. The movement was pretty fast and nice on the land, but then very, very slow in the water, which was a weird change. And you don't exactly swim in the water, you just kind of walk on the floor at the bottom. I guess you're in like a diving suit or something, or you don't know how to swim, who knows. It had some nice creepy atmosphere and a couple puzzles which weren't exactly puzzles. There was a thing that you clicked on that said solve puzzle and then you solved it. This was a very weird implementation of puzzles, but given the short time that the game jam had, I understand why they chose this method. And it had a very mysterious, ominous ending that I'm sure some people will like to think about long after they're done with it. So bonus points for that. Next up was Turgor Pressure. This one was super short, but it had some nice stuff going on in a small package. It had some really cool UI, lots of different UI elements all over the place that looked super slick and well polished. You're pretty much sending this drone down this weird tunnel shaft thing underwater to investigate this structure. It had a poster clipping into the wall, which actually it explained in the UI, so this is probably the first game where I've ever seen Z fighting as a feature. It had some heavy fog and some dark depths that felt a little Subnautica-ish, and as I mentioned, it was very short, but it had a nice ending and some pretty cool intro and outro screens to wrap it all up. After that, I played Submersio, at least I think that's how you say it. This was that kind of Silent Hill, Resident Evil style overhead camera, tank controls, you know, static camera angles. It had all that. One weird thing that I think was a bug was that every time the camera angle changed, the controls would change. It wasn't like regular tank controls and the controls didn't match the camera angle, so I think something was going on there. And then eventually I got to a note, which was like second or third note in the game crashed, tried it again, game crashed again. After 2 crashes, I decided to move on because I had way too many games to play, but for those that are into that, maybe they fixed the bug by now and it's worth checking out. Next up was Symphony of 7 Souls. This is a game where you walk around a Bloodborne-esque kind of world and you play violin music to ghosts to try and get them in your concert or something. The art in this was really nice, especially the architecture. As I mentioned, it kind of reminded me of Bloodborne, but it's got that old Baroque Gothic kind of look to it. On the other hand, I didn't really know where to go or what to do, besides kind of look for souls, so I was mostly just wandering around this area until I could find some ghosts. I found 4 of them, I think. I think there was 5, I couldn't really tell, but I never found that last one, so I couldn't get the ending. Which is a little unfortunate because I feel like there might have been some concert or something at the end that would have some music to go with it. I don't know, I'm just completely guessing there. But cool graphics, I liked this game, worth checking out. After that I played Please Don't Feed the Creatures of the Deep. This one had some very chill vibes going on, some very calming music in the background. The controls felt a little slippery, it was kind of hard to move around and aim accurately, but you did get to shoot potatoes out of a rocket launcher, and you shot those potatoes at sea monsters, which were in the like Nessie style of sea monsters, which is technically a lake monster. Anyways, that's aside from the point. You shot them at sea monsters, some drones tried to stop you, you go on some jump pads for some reason, and then I promptly fell in the water. After falling in the water, Nessie talked to me for a bit, and that was it. Working Tidal. This is one where you play as a submarine going around collecting trash, because I guess that's something that submarines could do. It's very Katamari-like, you go around and collect things, but unlike Katamari, you get money and use that to buy upgrades, which is cool. There were a couple levels and each one had some unique funky music going on, some stuff to collect, and things to explore. I liked it, but it took a little too long in my opinion to buy upgrades. I had to replay levels like 3 times each to move onwards. I got to the 3rd level in the game, which I believe is not the end. There were some more upgrades in the shop, which I didn't buy because it would have taken me like 4 or 5 more runs of that level alone to buy them. So I didn't see the very end of it, unfortunately. Way too many things to play, but for those who like collectathon games, I'm sure this would be right up your alley. Next up, I played the Dreadnought. This one had some pretty heavy screen effects, but I'm happy they let you turn down the scan lines a bit. On the other hand, the chromatic aberration was super heavy and it was kind of hard to read the text. Overall, I felt the movement was a little slow and turning around was especially slow. That could be my mouse or their sensitivity or something, or maybe they played it on a controller. You never really know. I will say this game had a pretty interesting monster concept that I'm not sure I've seen in other games. I don't want to really spoil it because it's the very end of the game. But if you're interested in weird mechanical monsters, it's got that going on. Next game I played was Shadow over Normoth. I'd say this one out of all of them is probably the closest to Silent Hill. It's got some exploration, it's got some spooky areas, it's got some item collecting, some combat, some monsters, you know, everything you'd expect from a Silent Hill type game. This game had a pretty good variety of monsters. There were actually 3 bosses in this game, which was really impressive for a game jam. Had a couple secrets to find. Of all the games I played in the game jam, I think this one was the longest with the most content in it. So if you're looking for something a little closer to 20 minutes to a half an hour, this might be perfect for you. I found the last boss kind of annoying. As for the other 2 bosses, you can pretty much just completely ignore their patterns and just shoot them over and over and you'll still win. The game is very generous on ammo drops. I think it takes about 4 pistol bullets to kill an enemy, and I ended the game with over 150 pistol bullets or something like that. And there are just way too many boxes to break everywhere in this game. Considering how slow it is to swing the weapon, I eventually just resorted to shooting everything with a pistol because I had so much extra ammo. But all in all, like I said, this was really big for a jam game, so they definitely deserve some credit for that. After that, I played a game called Shortcut. I think this is a game about an evil GPS, at least from what I gather. The car is pretty hard to control, it slips all over the place. I'm not sure if that was intentional because it kind of feeds into that evil GPS theme. And the game was pretty silent in general, there wasn't much background audio, or maybe my speakers were too low. Some of these games have some huge audio ranges, you never know. So after playing for a couple minutes, the GPS told me to turn left, and then it kind of just launched the car across the map. I think it was trying to drive me off a cliff, but it got stuck in the ground and the car just kind of stayed there. I tried everything I could, but I couldn't get the car unstuck from the ground, and that was that. Next up was TSOS. This one was very true to the PS1 style. The graphics were pretty close to PS1. It had those characters with the blocky bodies that are all separate parts, so I give them props for that. It had a pretty neat menu screen. The promotional graphic was also nice. It was kind of like anime style. There was a crowbar in the game, but I couldn't figure out how to swing it. It is possible that the information was on the store page that I missed, but anyways, I just kind of ran past all the monsters. They didn't seem too threatening as long as you were running. On the other hand, the camera kept jumping jumping all over the place. It seemed like it was getting stuck in the ceiling or something. It was kind of disorienting to have the camera constantly bounce up and down. And I'm not sure if the doors were supposed to have an animation, but every time you interacted with the door, I got a black screen and then it played like a door noise. I know a lot of these old Resident Evil style games like to include door animations, so I don't know if there was supposed to be an animation or just audio, or they didn't have time. All in all, the game was very labyrinthine. It had a very confusing layout. A lot of the hallways looked the same. All the doors looked the same. I just kind of run around aimlessly with no idea where to go. I think I spent about a quarter of my time in this game just waiting for doors to open. So after a good 10 minutes feeling lost, I closed the game and that was that. The next game on my list was called The Gentleman's Gold. This is another old-timey diving suit game. This one had some pretty nice art, the vegetation looked good, the lighting was good, had a good color palette. Overall, give it a thumbs up in the art department. As for the gameplay, I felt the movement was pretty slow. You could jump pretty high, but your horizontal movement was like a snail's pace, so it took a while to get anywhere in this game. This is another one that didn't have too much ambient audio, but my speakers might have been too low to hear it, you never know. It had a couple minor puzzles. Eventually I saw an eel in a tube with a glowing star behind it. Figured, hey, it's a Mario Easter egg. So I went towards it, got eaten by the eel, and that was game over. As I mentioned earlier with the slow movement, I didn't want to walk all the way back to that portion, so that was the end for me. After that I played the Bowels of the Ocean. Unlike the other games, this was very bright. I actually don't think there were any shadows in the game, or at least not any that I noticed. Used a harpoon gun in this game, which I think was the only other game besides ours that included a harpoon gun, even though it was an underwater game jam, so I'll give them props for that. There was some neat pixel bubble effects when you shot the harpoon, and I felt that the movement was a little slow even when you were using the sprint key, at least in comparison to the map. But all in all, this was a nice little experience that wraps up pretty quickly and has a moral question for you. Next up, I played Undercurrent. The movement speed actually felt pretty nice in this one. There were a lot of mini cinematics scattered throughout, but none of them were too long that they really felt like they got in the way. I thought this was pretty well done. As with other games, there were some door cinematics, but there were some unique animations for all the doors here, which was also cool to see. One interesting bug I found is that you can clip directly through the railings in the lighthouse. It didn't really have any purpose, but it was cool to do. And this was another game that was pretty light on audio. By the end of it, I felt pretty good about this one. It had a nice story progression and it felt like a fully realized short story. After that, I played a game called Sisters. This is also a pretty story-based game. Right in the beginning, there was some audio, some music that I think would be copyrighted, so for Twitch streamers playing it, you might want to watch out in the beginning of this one. This game had a lot of walls that you could walk into with no collision, and there's a mysterious monster that you never really see. It also had a pretty abrupt, confusing ending, but it might give you something to think about, so I won't spoil it. The next game I played was called Remnants in the Water. In this one, you're on board a submarine after a nuclear war. The submarine is filled with a bunch of weird, wacky characters that you talk to and learn a bit about. They all have some very unique character designs and make some weird noises when they talk to you. Eventually you check out the periscope and that's the end of the game. Pretty short experience, but some nice art and some wacky characters. The mixture of 2D, 3D, and some cartoonish elements kind of reminded me of Gorillas a bit, so if you're into that, check it out. After that, I played a game called Frontier Diver Progenexis. This one was very cool. It had some awesome UI, really good mix of 2D and 3D, and a lot of great effects going on. It's your standard space shooter, but it's got a lot of horror elements mixed in. There's a pretty good enemy variety, both in their models and their attack patterns, which is pretty cool to see in a short game jam. Having infinite lives is a nice touch, and it gives you a rating at the end based on how many lives you lost, so you can complete the game regardless of dying a lot. It had a pretty cool bumpin' soundtrack going on in the background, which is always a plus. Comparing this to some other space shooters, you have a beam in this one that lets you block bullets that you can use pretty often, so I rarely got killed by projectiles, unlike some other games, but I think it was still pretty well balanced. All around, I think this one was very well executed. After that, I played I Spoke to God. This one had a neat PDA style menu. The text was a little hard to read, even blown up. I think it was the font choice, or maybe it was just super low res, blown up super big. And in this one, the movement was probably the slowest of the whole bunch of games that I played, to the point where I didn't want to play too much more. I get kind of iffy about slow movement in games, even if they're really cool. In this one, you descend through a cave with some pipes in it, and you solve a puzzle along the way. Unfortunately, I missed some portion of the puzzle along my long descent, and the movement was a little too slow for me to want to spend a couple minutes slowly floating all the way back up. So I have to say, if you're going to play this one, make sure you get the puzzle on your way down, don't miss anything, and you won't lose a lot of time. After that, I played The Keeper. This one is about a lighthouse keeper that arrives on an island and some spooky stuff happens. I don't want to give away the ending, but it becomes kind of obvious about 3/4 of the way through. There's quite a big variety of props and stuff to look at in this one. I'd say overall the art is pretty solid. There were a couple puzzles in the game, but mostly they were just find an item and use it someplace, not something that you have to like solve particularly. And there were multiple voice actors. I think this is one of the very few games in the jam that did have multiple voice actors, so props to that. Next I played The Salvation Project. It had an evil Kermit doll telling you to get satanic stuff out of your house. This one played on the Satanic Panic, as well as sort of like Five Nights at Freddy's, you know, cursed haunted dolls, spooky. So anyways, evil Kermit tells you to go get stuff from your house and hide it, which includes like Metallica posters and stuff like that. Oh, did I mention you play as somebody named Karen? So anyways, Karen eventually gets all of them and Kermit tells her to do some evil satanic ritual, and I won't spoil the very ending, but I think you know where this is going. Next up, we got this Northern European game that I can't pronounce. You play as a diver here who I guess looks at wrecks and salvages them or something along those lines. In one wreck, there's a random alien head that transports you to an undersea world. In this undersea world, you enter some sort of submarine type thing and you have to go through it and find your way out. In the beginning, you're very limited on air, so you need to constantly find air tanks to not die, but eventually you'll have so much that it won't matter by the end. Inside the submarine, everything kind of looks the same, so it's very easy to get lost and you don't know exactly where you're going, but I managed to find my way out in the end, and it has a nice little scene to wrap it all up. Next up was Endless Blue. This one was very PS1 styled, but some more modern art laid on top. Like it had some nice textures and some nice models, but still in that very PS1 theme, if that makes any sense to you. I'd say this was heavily influenced by Metal Gear Solid in the UI, Resident Evil, as well as Silent Hill, of course, can't miss those two. The art was nice and the UI was very slick. Overall, I think the visuals were great on this. You get a gun and you shoot a monster, and then the game pretty much just ends and says to be continued. I mean, I'm not spoiling the ending here, the game just ends all of a sudden. So I think this is one of those jam games that they want to expand into a full project eventually. As it is now, there's not too much to it. I mean, you only fight one monster and solve one puzzle, but it gets you a good picture of where they're going with it. And the last game that I'm kind of obligated to mention because I worked on it is called Siren's Wharf. This is our first-person shooter/stealth project where you come upon an abandoned underwater park hunting for treasure. We got a couple puzzles in the game, we got a lot of monsters in the game, we got a lot of shooting you can do, items you can collect, you can interact with a lot of stuff in the environment even if it isn't important. And as you're going through this underwater park looking for treasure, you'll eventually uncover some secrets that might surprise you. I don't know, I'm obviously not going to give away the ending, you gotta play it yourself. So as for some final thoughts on the jam, I thought it was a pretty fun experience, although a little tiring working on the game for like a whole month straight, not getting time to do videos or any other stuff in my free time. But eventually we finished our game, got it out there on time, just like a day before the deadline, and I'm happy with that. And there's about 100 other games that people can play just from this jam. There's a whole lot of developers that contributed. You should really check out their projects. Some of them I think are definitely worth your time. I'll be linking all the games in this video down in the description, including my own game. You can play all of them right now, they're all free. And I'll also link the overall jam page if you want to check out some of the others. As for my top 5, I definitely have to give the first place spot to Frontier Diver Progenexis. I was really impressed by this one. It's a little bit different than the other horror titles. It's a space shooter, but it has horror elements. But it's very well executed. Got some great effects, got some good 2D, 3D UI, some nice visuals. It felt fun to play, had some good music. If you're going to play any game from the jam, this is my definite recommendation for you. As for some other games I'd recommend in no particular order, I'd go with The Keeper, Undercurrent, Shadow over Normoth, and Watershed. I think those 4 games plus Frontier Diver for the 5 would be my top 5 of the ones I played, so go check them out if you're interested. And if any of the other games caught your eye, I definitely recommend giving them a shot. Like I said, they're all about 5 to 15 minutes each, so it's not like a huge time commitment or anything. So that about wraps up this video. If you want to support my games, you can go play them right now, or if you want to support the channel, subscribing always helps out a lot. Either way, it's very much appreciated. Anyways, I got a big Oblivion video gotta wrap up, so I hope to see you all pretty soon.